Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're really excited to be with all of you tonight to celebrate this evening's event, Writing Home Across the Diaspora. We welcome Priyanka Champaneri and Rajiv Mohabir in conversation to celebrate the paperback releases of each of their books. So the first is The City of Good Death, and the second is Antiman, a hybrid memoir. Priyanka's transcendent prize-winning debut novel brings us inside India's holy city of Banaras, where the manager of a death hostel shepherds the dying who seek the release of a good death, while his own past refuses to let him go. And Rajiv's book was also winner of the Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight since you both won that prize. Antiman is an impassioned genre-blending memoir that navigates the fraught constellations of race, sexuality, and cultural heritage that have shaped his experiences as an Indo-Guyanese queer poet and immigrant to the United States. So if folks saw any of the write-ups for this, we were promised aunties in training, good snacks, all the things. So I want to encourage folks, please make yourselves at home. If you would like to shout out in the chat where you're watching from, that's always a delight. You can also share what snacks you're having. If you're having chat, if you're having chai tea, if you're having fried chicken, whatever you're having, shout it out. We love that. And of course, ask questions. You can do that in the chat, or you can do it in the Ask a Question tab. And the authors will work that in, and then I'll pop up at the very end and tell you how you can buy their books. But a big Charis welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh my gosh, ER, thank you for having us. Charis Books, thank you for having us. And Rajiv, I've been looking forward to this for so many months. Thank you for being here.
My goodness, yeah, and thank you to you also, Priyanka. You know, I've been so excited to be in conversation with you and to see you all over social media, and not over social media, but then also like on our phone calls and talking about life.
I know. And I generally have like a little bit of low grade or sometimes high grade anxiety every time I have to do an event, even when it's virtual. But I had zero, except about, just so the audience knows, there's an impending thunderstorm coming to Northern Virginia. So my Wi-Fi might go out. That's the only anxiety I have. I've been so excited, because I know it's not going to feel like an event. It's just going to feel like chatting with my friend, Rajiv, who's written this amazing book that's won so many prizes or been a finalist for so many prizes.
Oh my gosh, totally. And the same as with you as well. I mean, your book has had quite a year. And, to have it come out also in paperback has just been fabulous. And we were talking a little bit before about like the colors of the cover of your book. And it's just a wonderful kind of new neon to match the old neon.
Yep.
What a beautiful explosion. And as folks will read your book, they'll see the explosion is on the line level, in the description level, with these really beautiful similes, constructions of similes and comparisons, as well as kind of like making that city of Kashi, that city that we both love, into this like kind of vibrant space that I actually want to now die in myself. So.
Really? Oh my gosh, I feel like we should put a pin in that, because that's something that we should talk about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe not tonight. I don't know, maybe tonight.
Yeah.
But
yeah, exactly. No, not anytime soon. No.
But anyway, yeah, like why don't we start off, Priyanka? I'd love to hear you read the first.
Yeah. And so I'm going to read, actually, this is a section that Rajiv pointed out to me before we started the meeting, where I thought, oh, well, I've never read from there, so why don't I? So this is literally page 1 of the book. And this book is divided up into 5 parts. And each part starts with this italicized section, this own story of its own, which hopefully, as you have that experience of going through the book and reading it, it all kind of coalesce and come together at the end. So I'm going to just read really briefly from that first page with that first italicized section. There is one place in Kashi that everyone avoids. It's easy to find. Walk to Mirghat, descend those stone steps, push through the crowds of people, and drift toward the right as you go down, down, down. Stop just as you reach the final step, before the stone dips into the river, and mark the place where the ground is clean, where the stone seems newly carved next to the worn and crumbling rock surrounding it. Even better, sit some paces away and watch. See how all folk avoid stepping there, how even those in deep throes of gossip or prayer direct their feet elsewhere. The youngest children know to jump over that clean stone. Men cross on tiptoe, and women take the widest circle around it, hems held in hands so that no single thread of their saris will touch that cursed spot. Most don't question why they cannot cross. They obey an internal order, the action as instinctive as turning the ear toward the sound of a new story. But for those who do know, who never come near that place without the great God's name on their lips, the reason is absolute. A ghost wanders there. A woman swollen with child crossing that path might suddenly find her belly hollow. Men setting a wrong foot begin to weep without control. Careless children lose their smiles or the ability to speak. Old folk lose their sight or the last of their senses. There's no pattern, no rhyme or reason to the ghost's actions, simply its thirst for malice. The only thing common to these tales of calamity is what you hear, what you see just before the spirit is upon you. The chime of silver anklets, a song that the wind winnows down to a sob, and the rustle and flash of silk, of a parrot green that glows in the night. Thank you.
Whew, that was so great. Thank you so much for reading that. What I really admire about these pieces is that, like, and especially this piece, is that it really invokes the spirit of Kashi, of Varanasi, as you are very particular with that. Let's call it placeness that I just admire so much. Varanasi is very much filled with all of these like site-specific, highly localized stories. So this feels very much like in that. I felt myself being on the Ghats. I felt myself in the city, and I really admire that.
And it's a big compliment for me, Rajiv, coming from you, one, because you've been to Banaras, and as you know, I have not been, but two, because you're a poet. And as we all know, poets are so attuned to language, and you so attuned to language, as folks will learn when they read Antiman. Oh my goodness. So for you to say that, So I am now waiting for you to read, because everybody out there, every time Rajiv reads, it's such an absolute treat just to be able to hear. Reading his book is a treat in itself, because you get this incredible experience of both narrative prose, but you're also getting his poetry, which is an experience unto itself. But hearing him read it in his voice, in his cadence, is like just an absolute joy. So I'm really excited for us to all experience it now.
Priyanka, thank you. That's so sweet. I'm going to read the first page of the author's note. The author's note, if after a page, if you're not feeling too fatigued, dear Priyanka, then I might continue. But the author's note, as it begins the book. In this memoir, I have changed many names, places, and relationships in order to keep the spirits appeased. Protecting kin is the work of the ancestors, but so too is speaking truth. I have represented the emotional truths that have led me up to the present, this crucible of years in which I discovered the poetry that also discovered me. I have chosen the title Antiman, consciously aware that it is upsetting, that the term is a violent one. I use it in order to shift its heaviness and release the trap of its letters, to embody it with a flourish, despite those who would use it to condemn and damn. Those who are not familiar with the Caribbean slur may hear it as anti-man or against man, which could be its own title. Another mishearing of the word anti-man, before man, is also apt. To my nibblings, I am very much an auntie-man. Be I chacha, uncle, or mamu. The word Antiman represents and holds a history for me, one of migration and survival. This is my own accounting of events as I remember them. I was entrusted with my Aji's only possessions, her melodies and words in her dying language of Guyanese Bhojpuri. They were seedlings from India, grown in the plantations of Berbice in Guyana, and pressed for their sweetness in Orlando, Toronto, and New York. After her death in 2010, I was moved to collect what I could of her recordings and translate the songs she wanted me to learn. All her life in diaspora, far from Berbice, my Aji's songs were ignored. Her language and customs have died out with her, replaced in diasporic Guyanese spaces with Bollywood and other mass media. But in them, I found the queerest magic. I think I'll end there, and I'll say that this is my Aji here. So she's always behind me as I do this.
I love that. And, you know, for folks out there, I urge you to get this book and continue reading that author's note on your own, because the place where Rajiv stopped, he's about to tell you all about his Aji, who, quite frankly, for me, she was the heroine of this book. And when I finished reading the book, I felt a deep sense of regret that I didn't get to meet her as well, Rajiv, because you created such a connection to her in your writing. And you've opened the door for the reader to step through and really experience the connection that you had with her, which I think is such a gift, and also a gift for yourself, I would hope, like years and years down the line, for you to go back and look at this memoir and just reflect on how you wrote about that relationship at this moment in your life. So I'm going to, you know, because I have the mic, I'm just going to continue with the mic, because I want to ask you, I'm just like been burning to ask you the first question, which is, you and I, the reason we've connected is we both won this Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing, which was our publisher. And it's the reason that our books were published. It's certainly the reason my book was published, because literally everybody had rejected me before I won that prize. And I'm so curious to hear from you. Your paperback, your beautiful paperback, just came out on Tuesday. I think we all artists kind of have this vision that we're working towards in terms of what we think it might be like once our work is out in the world with a wider audience. And I'm so curious to hear about what that expectation was for you, how the reality ended up shaking out, things that really surprised you, things that you learned, anything that you'd like to talk about in terms of the publication journey and everything that you've just, all that knowledge you've accrued.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this very thoughtful question and your wish to meet my Aji. My Aji is everywhere. And as you said that, like, that I could hear the thunder coming from your end. And I acknowledge the fact of that magic. And like your lightning earrings, oh my God. It's just like you're bringing the like full on power of the storm with you. And I appreciate it. And I want to make space for that as well. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it is quite exceptional to have a book come out in the world, just in general. It's you know, nonfiction isn't my first genre, so I had several books of poetry, 2 books of poetry that had already been published, as well as a book of translations. And you know, the readership for poetry, sadly, is very narrow. You know, and a print run of, you know, maybe 1,000 is wonderful, and if you go into a second printing, then great. Like, your poetry is doing a really amazing job. And with that being said, like, my expectations coming into, oh, I love it. Oh my goodness, thank you so much.
I just muted myself. So
no, the rainstorms from the south give me such power. Like, I love it, and they're so energizing. And I guess, like, I don't know, Northern Virginia, I don't know if I would call that the South, but I'm going to pretend that it is. Yeah. But that journey for me has, like, you know, taken on this like really strange shift. As soon as the prose came out, more and more people were reading it. More and more people had like access to kind of like the poetry that I was writing as well, which was a really funny thing. I had a friend who used to be like, you know, Rajiv, your poems are great, but write the stories behind the poems, which is, you know, that feels really like awful as like a poet. But then also it made me interrogate that idea of, well, what goes behind everything? What are the stories that are too big for poems, as you know, the writer Rigoberto Gonzalez had put it to me once. And so I have been completely shocked in this last calendar year that people have been reading the book, and I've been, you know, getting responses and messages from people all over, you know, this country, for sure. Young people who are like really ecstatic to see themselves reflected in the text. You know, elder folks who are excited to see our non-standard languages actually being used in storytelling conventions. And so that has been really been very arresting for me in that it wasn't anything that I had expected at all. And now with the life of the paperback, I think like it's going to even like spread its tendrils even farther. And I mean, I really love this question, and I want to kind of like bounce that back to you, Priyanka, because your book is so nuanced and it does so many different things. It holds so many stories in it. And I'll get back into this a little bit more detailed, but I want to know, like, your hardback is about a year old now, a little bit over a year old now, and it's been super successful. And now that your paperback has been released, how do you feel? How has your journey been as a published novelist?
It is this weird feeling of detachment. It's I don't know, it's really hard for me. Like, there are these moments where I get to do these events and I'm always very, very humbled and grateful by any kind of interaction I get to have associated with the book. But I heard from other writers that this is a thing that happens, whether immediately or later on, and that it really exists outside of you. And I feel like the more time that passes, it becomes almost more and more puzzling to me that I'm attached to it. It's like, it's so hard to describe this, but like, I see it on the shelf behind you, or I have this paperback behind me, and I see my name is there, and I know I wrote it and I dedicated it to my parents and my brother, like I know all of these things, and yet it seems like something so outside of me, almost in the sense of sometimes when you look back at childhood pictures of yourself and you don't even recognize or remember that person. And none of that, for me, I think in a way that's really good. It's good for me to start to experience that detachment from it, because I really believe that there is a time when the writer or the artist, they have their time with the work, and that's when they're actually working on it. But that the minute it gets released into the world, you do have to move away from it, because it's not just yours anymore. It becomes like something that the reader gets to experience, and they get to also apply their own reader framework to it. So it's just been really interesting, but also just, I do catch myself at moments where I'm like, wow, it really happened. I really wrote a book. I mean, number one, I wrote a book. I finished writing a book, because I'm pretty notorious in my family for not finishing anything. And it was published, and it's in this beautiful material form, and people are reading it. So there is a bit of a kind of befuddlement to the entire process. And I'm curious about whether you also experience that befuddlement, because I feel like this is going to be a very lofty comparison, but I was recently at the beach with my family. We try to go every year. We go to North Carolina, and every time I stand, on the banks of the ocean, I can feel my mind so desperately wanting to contain the experience in a way that stamps it within my mind. But you can't, because of course the ocean is so incredibly vast. No matter how much I stare at it, I can't capture that memory. And in a way, the book feels like that to me. When I look at it, it's like I can't contain it anymore. And I guess I couldn't contain it because I ended up, writing it all down. But it really becomes something entirely separate, entirely on its own. And I'm here as its representative, but at times it kind of feels like, well, what am I doing here? Like, shouldn't the book be here instead of me? Why am I like, as if it's its own entity. Like I'm trying to, I hope to the audience, I hope I'm explaining that in a coherent fashion, but I'm pretty sure, Rajiv, you probably know what I'm talking about.
No, totally. Like it is immense. Well, your book specifically is immense. In its scope, its temporal constrictions and flights. Let's say the way that it straddles the normal and the paranormal. All of these things, and that immensity that you're talking about, that makes a lot of sense, because how would you take the experience, the feelings, whether they're affective or the readerly joy and the writerly joy that you get from something, and to say that this is what it is, and this will speak for the book. The poet Shikha Saklani Malavia has this really beautiful thing. She says, the book has its own karma, like its own karma, karam. And like how after it comes out, it does its own thing, and like you're the writer, but that's all you are. Everybody else has their own response. I think like that's a thing. And when I stand at the edge of the immense, I like to think of this. And what you said triggered this memory for me, so I'm going to tell it to you. But there was a playwright who had come to visit me in Hawaii when I lived there, and we had gone to the top of the place of lookout called Makapu'u. And we were standing up, and she was like saying, another Desi sister, and she was like, this feels like so great, like, I want to really like capture it all, I want to feel it all, I want to remember it all. And I was like, that feeling is so overwhelming that even like, as a writerly sense, the need to write everything and to get it like that, I don't think and based on your writing and just the imagery, even on the image level that you employ here, I think that you actually do the other thing where you let it hold you instead of you trying to rein it in. And then the experience becomes completely immersive. And then all of a sudden you are in this universe, you are in Varanasi, and I think like when you're thinking about the ocean too, and the immensity of that writing, maybe it's holding us, right? Maybe it's that web too that we've built.
Well, and I'm so curious for you specifically because, memoir is different from writing about fiction because memoir is your life. And one of the great things about the paperback is you have the addition of this interview that you did with Electric Lit, which I really enjoyed reading, where you're talking about just that process. But, one of the questions asked of you is just how painful it was to be dredging up a lot of those memories and how you deal with that emotionally, psychologically, et cetera, et cetera. So I hate to say this because it sounds so cliche, but was it writing as therapy? Did it feel that way? And then, so in a way, does it feel like you've been able to package all of that in here? You quite literally can put it up on a shelf and put it away if you need to.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to live inside anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you for this question. Actually, the book came about because I was writing essays around the poetry for my first collection, The Taxidermist Cut. And it was a friend of mine who said, like, to be relevant on the continental United States, I was living in Hawaii at the time. He was like, you have to publish like an essay maybe every 3 months, every 4 months. And I was like, oh my God, okay, I have no idea about the genre. I don't know what I'm doing. Let me just tell stories. And then after a while, a friend of mine was like, actually, Anjali Roy is my friend who said this to me. She was like, these are all around the same decade of your life. You have a memoir here. So then I was like, oh, and so like it hadn't necessarily been therapy, I guess, maybe just kind of like this, like what I was imagining to be the writerly hustle. But when it came down to it, writing certain essays, writing certain stories, triggered panic attacks for me, and going through like mental health counseling and that kind of thing, as well as diagnoses of mental health stuff. Writing the memoir was really kind of like, it wasn't a trigger; it was a good way to externalize things, to have control again over my own narrative, instead of having the other people tell it. Like part of it, and part of the upset for me is that these were stories that other people had told about me, and I wanted to be the one to tell my story myself. So there's that whole part of it, and I think that like that's a particularity of being from a South Asian family in diaspora, in that like I have this like connection to family story, but then also like auntie trauma as I like engage my own auntiness, and I think like I want to ask you, why do you think it's important? And then this might be a little bit more like existential. Why is it important for us folks in the diaspora to tell stories that are rooted in home country, whatever home country it might be?
Oh gosh, it's such a multi-layered question. And also just that phrase you just used about auntiness and like the display of auntiness. And you talk about aunties in the back in that interview with Electric Lit. And one thing that you said that really struck me is like the role of auntie to be defining the borders of what is expected, roles for everybody, and then keeping everybody so firmly in line. I think that also goes back to South Asian culture of keeping quiet about family stories, which was definitely something that happened in my family quite a bit. And, certainly, we all families have their own degree of skeletons in the closet. And we certainly did. Nothing salacious, people out there, but like salacious to us. And it was just interesting. It's interesting to reflect back on my childhood and the things that I heard as a child now as an adult, and just being able to understand all of the layers of that. And specifically with telling stories and keeping silence about certain things. I remember as a kid, something might happen in the family. My mom might have been hospitalized for something, or, something that really on the surface is very, very harmless and not really gossip worthy at all. But in my family, it would be like, oh, don't tell. That just stays within the family. We don't, like, when you go to school, don't tell your friends about it. Don't tell your teacher about it. Don't tell anybody about it. And I think as a child, the thing I probably got scolded for the most was being a chatterbox and, telling the family secrets out loud to people. And I never understood it as a kid, because in my mind, I'd hear my friends also relaying similar information. So it was like, well, why can't I? And, it became another marker of different, of other, which I know you're very familiar with, like all these different ways that I'm othered. And, it was like, well, it became a thing of, well, is this a Champaneri thing? Is this a Desi thing? Is this a Gujarati thing? Like, what is this? And it took so many years for me to understand where that was rooted in. And I think it must have been a really big part of my life, because that's one of the reasons this book has a huge thread of gossip in it and families keeping quiet about certain stories or telling them in certain ways. It was realizing that my parents were doing it as a protective gesture, that they were two immigrants to this country where they didn't know anybody, and they were already surrounded by people who to them were the other, these people who are not Indian and who they couldn't trust. And they didn't know how things worked here. And back in their own home places, you wouldn't talk about those things because they could be weaponized against you later on, sad as it is. I think, a lot of that just went into the shaping. And so when we talk about like identity and diaspora, certainly all of that, played a role. And, we could just kind of go on and on and on. One thing that I definitely want to talk about with your book, and this is a very, very clunky segue, but it makes sense to me, which is just with language. One of the things you do in this book that's so extraordinary is just your use of language. And you've got, your Guyanese Bhojpuri in there, and then like, you're going to have to forgive me, but, all just the different ways that you're using language. But what was interesting to me is, again, in that interview in the back, you're talking about this desire from South Asian communities to assimilate. And one of the ways that manifested was for your family to deny that language heritage. So when you went back to your Aji and you were specifically learning those forms and talking to her in that way, that also cast you out in a way. And I'd love just to, punt the question back to you, not only with language, but in other sources. Like, how is this book brown, I guess? Like, let's just talk about brownness. Like, what makes this a brown book, or what makes a book a brown book?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, yeah. The secrets and the secretive nature of the characters in your book there's like kind of like a crescendo with the character of Shobha, and the secrets that Shobha keeps and the way that she writes Sakamna. I think do exactly what you're saying in terms of like the secrets and the hushedness. Like, what does it mean to bear yourself and to be fully who you are, and to be like, the goddess incarnate in your anger, in a family. That's like some real stakes that I recognized in your book, that I was like, wow, like this feels so incredibly emotionally resonant for me. You know, when I'm told that this is how I'm supposed to be, you're not supposed to feel, you know, X, Y, or Z. Even when Pramesh is or a character who's crying for, you know, somebody who had passed away, it's kind of like, okay, now I have to kind of man up and not have this overwhelming feeling. That to me also felt super resonance in what you're saying. And so when it comes to Antiman being a brown book, I mean, that's, I think, I can tackle this so many ways. I'll talk maybe about formally, because I like to think of this as a, you know, if Antiman is written in narrative prose, there's translation, there's transcription, there's song, there's movement, there's I'm trying to reconstructed myth and folktale that happen here. And so it reminds me of the way storytelling happens in my family, where we would all get together and we'd just be sitting around and someone would remember part of the story and they would say whatever part of the story is. And then like it'll trigger my sister into singing the song. So she'll automatically just start singing the song. Everyone will sing along, and then so-and-so will say, oh yeah, but remember when this happened, and they would tell the story. And it would be all in different dialects and languages. Like the songs would always be in, it would either be calypsos or you know, Bollywood songs and that kind of thing. So that's how this book is brown, and in a kind of superficial way. In another way, I mean, it's very anti-brown in another way, because it's telling stories that I'm not supposed to say. You know, it's funny when you were like, your parents told you not to do this, that you couldn't speak. I mean, that was so ingrained in us. But I was in my family always the one who was the upstart, always the one that was like in trouble, the one who was bad. And my mom and dad, whenever they would get mad at me, they'd be like, yeah, one day you're going to write a book, a tell-all about how awful we were as a parents. And I was like, you know, as a 7-year-old, what do you do with that? You know,
but that's also so brown, isn't it, for your parents to like make you feel guilty in that way, to be like, you know, like, we came to this country for you, and to just like start off on that train.
Totally. I mean, it's funny because even just like 2 weeks ago, my brother like had this disparaging remark against me because of the fact I had written this book. And it's just kind of like, I'm never going to be out from this book's shadow, but then it's like a freedom that I have. But anyway, yeah, talking about structure, I kind of want to stay on that a little bit. Yeah. Because with nonfiction, it's there's so much give and take you can give, or you can have in a book, but only so much. But with like with novel and fiction, you know, structure is a little bit more plastic. You can do so much more. And what you do so wonderfully well in your book is that you create these you know, arteries and capillaries and this whole vast system of stories that are interconnected. And I was alluding to this. It reminded me a lot of like the Panchatantra system, or like the way Salman Rushdie writes, you know, in that there's stories embedded within stories. Like, you know, even when reading the Ramcharitmanas version of the Ramayana story, it's Lord Shiva says to Parvati, he says about this person who says to this person. And as I was reading your book, I was like, there are so many avenues that lead to gullies that branch off into little pathways. You know, so for example, you know, the protagonist seems to be very strict in the beginning with his lodgers. And to be very clear, the book is about, without giving up too much information, the book is about, you know, this family that runs this death hostel in Banaras, like a place where people would literally go to die, because in Hindu mythology, it's seen as like the right place, or to die in this city is to attain moksha, or liberation from birth and death and that. So the person Pramesh, the Pramesh, excuse me, I say Pramesh because it's like all of these like names are so Bhojpuri to me that
yeah.
Pramesh, like Parmesh. I have Parmeshes in my family. Loknath. Oh my God, I had an uncle named Loknath. Anyway, Pramesh, you know, seems really strict, but then we learn about the soft places in his life, right? His closeness and his quarrels with his cousin Sagar, for example. And then like nuances in the character who is Shobha, his wife, with his relationship also with Sagar's wife Kamna that I just talked about. And I was just wondering what guided your decisions around structure and organization here, because the orchestration of it is just it takes the top off of your head. And you all, when you read this, you will be astounded to see how these things all lead into a very particular place. And I was just wondering, Priyanka, how that happened for you.
You're making it sound like it was so intentional on my part, and you're giving me way too much credit, Rajiv. And I will say a lot of credit goes to our mutual editor, Nathan Rostron, in terms of, because by the time I got to the end of the draft, all of the pieces were there, but I needed help with how to shuffle them together to make it to make it work in this way that it's amazing that you had this experience as a reader, because that's definitely what the pinnacle of my hope was but you need somebody, I think, at a certain point when you write something this big, this immense, so many characters, so many plot lines, so much in the timeline in terms of back and forth. And it's so hard because it's a line of dominoes. And if you take one domino out of the line, then you got to replace it really quick or figure out what to do with the other ones, because everything is resting on everything else. And so having an outside person there who doesn't have that closeness to it the way that the writer does, and who can really take a step back and say, well, you already have that piece there, let's move it and shift it, was super helpful. But I will tell you, I love books that do this. I've always loved books that do this. So you mentioned Salman Rushdie, love Midnight's Children. I love Vikram Seth. The Subal Boy is my favorite book of all time. A House for Mr. Biswas, and then Anna Karenina, just all of these expansive narratives where there's just a million characters and a million different things going on, and a lot of little side stories that might not necessarily have anything to do with the plot, but some of them do, and you wouldn't even know it until you get to the end and it all clicks together. It's so satisfying for me as a reader to read those books, because it just feels like you get to be part of that world. And by the time I get to the end of reading those books, there's a real sadness and melancholy to leaving them, because you spent so much of your own life with them. So you feel like you're also part of it too. So it's always been my dream to write a book like that. But I didn't know how. It always seemed like the most impossible thing. And so, this book took me 10 years to write. When I started it out, I mean this with absolutely zero guile. I thought it was going to be a really simple story. I didn't think it was going to get this complicated at all. And what ended up happening, because I'm an organic writer, I don't know what I'm writing towards. I have to write to discover the story. So this book opens with a dead body being pulled out of the Ganga River. I had that scene. I had my main characters, and I had the setting of the death hostel, and I didn't have anything else. So it was 10 years of writing to figure out what the story was. I would often get stuck writing that main narrative thread. So then what would happen during those moments of being stuck, and I would be sitting at my desk and thinking, well, I don't want to not write. I feel like I should be writing something. So let me write a little side story. Let's explore some other characters in the city. Let's go down this lane, or let's see what this person is doing, or let's just do that. And because that was fun. It was fun for me. And because I truly didn't think at the time when I would be writing it that it would layer it back at all. It was just a fun way for me to occupy my writing time, and, like a character sketch almost. The really miraculous thing that I always feel like is that alchemy of writing that just makes the artistic process so magical is years down the line, when I would be stuck with the main plot and I would need something to happen, and I would realize, oh, one of those tiny side stories I wrote all those years ago is the perfect vehicle to make this thing in the main plot happen. I didn't plan that. I mean, what else could that be besides, I really, really feel like writing for me is it's like the conduit, right? You're grabbing whatever the universe, the atmosphere, the muse, however you want to term it, you're grabbing whatever is there for you, and you're weaving it in, and you're just kind of hopefully staying out of the way of the work. So those kinds of moments were the moments that really propelled me forward in terms of writing. And then by the time I got to the end of it, I had this big, huge, expansive thing that I then had help with our editor, Nathan, in terms of how to, like, already taking what I had, but how can we, like, is there a way to better organize it and take a section that's here and move it up, or, you know, do different things like that. That's where having an editor was super, super helpful. But I wanted to point out something to you that you had said, Rajiv, in terms of, you mentioned with writing nonfiction, how you felt like writing fiction has more plasticity to it, and nonfiction, it doesn't. But I mean, your memoir is absolutely contradicting what you just said, because you've done so many incredible, cool things in terms of exploding that form or combining it with your poetry. And also, you know, the traditional folk songs, just so many cool things. There are moments where there's just so much, as traumatic as I know dredging up those memories would have been, there's also, you're having a lot of fun as a writer. And one of the questions I had wanted to ask you, and I think I probably asked you this before, but it's such a great question, I'm going to ask it again, is that you've got your hands in so many different pots as an artist. You know, you're a translator, you're a poet, you're a writer of nonfiction. I also know you're a writer of fiction. And I'm just always so curious to hear you talk about how those things intersect in your brain. Is it like one pot and you sit down to write and you don't know the form it's going to take and it comes out? One informs the other, or you only ever work on one type at a time? Like, I always love to hear you talk about
that. Wow. Well, thank you. Coming to think of how to hold the immensity in the world of, you know, just the ocean, let's say, of creativity. It's a challenging thing, how to funnel down what that reach into the muse onto the page, and what that means. Typically, I will write essays as they are assigned to me, or people will ask for essays, and that's usually how I do the nonfiction, unless it's like nonfiction that's kind of like for another particular and specific purpose. Like I'm trying to envision essays around, like this whale watching project that I've been doing for several years now, and that needs to very much be in the essay form, and I know it because I already have whale poems that are like in the world, and fiction hasn't really spoken to me yet. I'm only now flirting with fiction. I think that in my mind, they exist in different spaces. My practice of poetry writing is a little bit more refined than my practice of writing essay. And when I say refined, I mean, like, I actually, like, there's a way that I'll do the poem thing. Like, it's usually based on reading, and then, like, also, like, I have this image. I have a journal up here. It's like my image journal that, like, when I'm being good and when I'm not sick, I try to write at least 4 images a week in it, and just the images, so that, like, later on in poems I'll have that I can access. And so that's something, because it keeps track of the subconscious mind. Is where I see poetry working for me. When it comes to the essay, that's more kind of like, well, what am I trying to say? What am I trying to prove or trying to make? With the fiction that I've been also writing, it's been kind of more like, ooh, I have this idea for a story. Let me get to know who these characters are. Are they people? Are they realistic? Am I projecting too much? Am I not projecting enough? That kind of thing.
Yeah. The image journal, that's really, so I have a journal where I keep, like, clippings and that kind of thing in it. And then, of course, we all have our journals where we're, like, jotting down things that come to us. But I really like that as an exercise, because it feels low stakes. All you have to do is describe the image. Now, are these images that come into your mind, or like things that you've seen, like, in your day-to-day?
So there's a couple of ways. So, like, with the image journal, I like to write down just what I see, or I will write down what I see and let just follow my mind if I'm feeling in particular. So you're right, it's low stakes. It's something that I actually assign in my creative writing classes, both in nonfiction and poetry. So I think it's like a good thing. I can send you the worksheet that I give.
No, please do. I'd love to see. No, it seems like, because I don't write every day. I know that's a thing, like, like write every day. And I know there are people who do it and people who don't. But that seems like a really good just exercise to try, on a day where I feel like I want to be writing, but it's not, I don't necessarily have any kind of direction. And yeah, description, man. I'm always here for it. I have another question. Well, I have many questions for you, but if I don't want to like keep jumping in the line.
Oh yeah, I have questions for you too, actually, because I know that you like this question, and you've kind of touched on this, and I want you I'm going to put two questions together. I want you to like kind of break open for us. Do you think of you have this other love of your life in terms of art, and it's knitting, and I was wondering like about the process of writing a novel and knitting. Like, do you find them to be similar in the same way that So, for example, in knitting, do you work from a pattern? And in writing, do you work from an outline? Do you have a general idea of what you want to make and do you rely on just kind of like already knowing how to get there, or as you said earlier, not knowing how to get there? And then also, like, as a side note, wait, hold on. I heard you say once upon a time that you write first longhand.
Yeah.
You write your prose in notebooks, and you got to tell me about these notebooks. Yeah. Are they like numbered? Like, when do you transfer them to the computer? Yeah. I'm dying to know this.
So the knitting question, when I think about knitting as a writer and as an artist, there are so many similarities. So with knitting, I've been knitting for 20 years. At this point, I really can, I can see a sweater in a store and I can make it. Just look at it and I can make it. But I generally knit from patterns, just because I found as I've gotten older, my brain is like, I don't want to figure it out. Just have someone tell me what to do. But the journey of knitting in terms of just finding pleasure in actually making it, that is one thing that I'm always trying to emulate in my writing, that it should be about the process and not about the product. And quite frankly, I've knit so many sweaters and things over my lifetime. I don't wear them very often. I have a whole entire wardrobe, but the reason I make them, and it's something that it's a itch that my mom always has, where she's like, why don't you wear these things that you make? And I'll just give them all to her, and I'll be like, because I didn't make them to wear them. I just made them to make them, because the making was the fun part of it. But there are so many other similarities in terms of, well, you'll get to a certain point with the sweater and be like, well, this is not going to fit no matter what I do. So I have to rip out the entire thing and start all over. And you got to do that with your writing. And the feeling is often very much the same. There's always a little bit of time that has to go by where you're licking your wounds and you're kind of coming to terms with it. Like when you've written maybe hundreds of pages and you realize, it's not going to work. I'm going to have to turn right back around, so there's just so many similarities with it in terms of that. It is not, so many people ask me, they're like, well, does your knitting, are you thinking about stories and writing, as you're knitting? And I'm like, nope, I'm thinking about Shahs of Sunset as I'm knitting, or Real Housewives, or my brain's literally just I wish, for some reason, when I take a walking is really, really good for writing. But for some reason, knitting, I think it really just is that meditative state where your brain, my brain anyway, really isn't in the act of creation. It's really just resting. So knitting, unfortunately, is not good for my writing, because I could knit all day, every day. But that means I'm not going to write. And I probably would write a little bit more if I wasn't such an avid knitter. Now, the thing with the writing the longhand, I'm somebody who I'll do anything at any given moment. So it could be that for whatever reason, the certain pen and the certain notebook in this certain spot in my house is the sweet spot and everything's really working. So fine, we're going to ride that wave as long as we can with these tools that we have. And then the minute it dries up and it feels like it's just not working anymore, that's when I'll transfer it to the computer. That's when I'll type it up. So it's a back and forth. And then I'll try and ride the wave off of the computer as long as I can. And inevitably it will stop. Then I'll go back to the notebooks. And it's funny. With the City of Good Death, I was using these very specific spiral bound notebooks that I think were 6 by 8 or something. And I was using them because at the time I was working a job where they had those in the supply cabinet. And so I wasn't stealing from the office supply cabinet, but I could have it on my desk at work and nobody would know that it wasn't work related. But it was really my writing. So what I could do was I'm, working away and, I get an idea. Here's my writing notebook. I can just write it down. I'm not going to lose it. you know, so I have like for City of Good Death, I have about 4 or 5 of those for that. There's just an immense sense of satisfaction when I go back at those notebooks and I look at all these pages filled with my handwriting and different colors of pen, different kinds of pen that I don't have when I look at a computer screen. I think when I look at the computer screen and I see the document, and even when I print those pages out and I have it, I don't have a sense that I did it. You know, it could be that anybody did it. There's like, as I'm divorced from the fact that I created it. But when it's in my handwriting, like, I know I did it. It's such a personal connection. So I don't exclusively write longhand, but I did write quite a bit of it. And a lot of it was because of just juggling a full-time job and trying to write a novel and just wanting to maximize, not lose anything that might come to me at any given moment.
That is amazing. I am like totally astounded. And like, what a good idea. You know, have like matching stationery with your place of employment so you can actually do the creative thing in the open. It's like hiding in plain sight.
You know, because like almost every job, like unless like, you know, you're somebody who's like, you know, in the healthcare industry or the service industry, like most office jobs, there's always some pocket of downtime. And I remember I would just be sitting at my cube looking out the window being like, I don't work this job anymore, so I can say this. But just being like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I doing here? But then having that notebook, it would be like, oh, wait, I have to sit here, but I can work. I can work on my own stuff because I don't have any actual work to do because I finished it already. And I can still be productive in, you know, in this artistic way that actually satisfies me in the way that job at that time did not. Now, one question I really, really wanted to ask you, because we're kind of getting close to time, because we had talked about, or I had asked you about what makes it a brown book. And I'm so curious, like for any writers out there, you and I both know that within the South Asian culture, there is that refrain of when you're revealing things you should not be revealing, hearing from your elders or whoever, your aunties, what will people say when they hear this? What will people say? And I will tell you, when I started writing, there were things that I wouldn't even touch because I thought, oh gosh, what will people say? What will my parents say? What will whoever say? Like, they can't know that I know about sex. I can't write about sex in any capacity, you know, like just various things. And so I am so curious, what advice do you have for writers who might, and not just brown writers, but any writers coming from, you know, that marginalized community that might have a very, very tight familial structure similar to a South Asian structure? What advice would you give them to be able to break out of that box?
I would say write everything, write the story that your mama told you not to tell, but that doesn't mean you have to publish it. Write it, get it out of your system, get it out onto the paper, and then see. And then also a different kind of way to think about this is that, you know, one of the things that kept my family, you know, in this kind of like shame spiral was the fact that my parents' siblings never talked to each other about what the cousins were doing. You know, we had so much of this shame around, oh, well, you're not the right kind of child, or, oh, you're smoking marijuana, like, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. But then, you know, what will, you know, so-and-so auntie's son think, or, you know, he doesn't do that. When you talk to so-and-so auntie's son, you guys smoke pot together. And it's, you know, it's kind of like his mom also knows. And it's like, what if our parents actually got together and were like, oh yeah, that's a thing. That's how we can deal with this, instead of like, don't do this because so-and-so doesn't do it. Or that's a hush hush secret in our family. It'll bring us shame and shame us to death. Well, we all have these skeletons. Every last single family out there or person has these skeletons. Talking about it will dispel, you know, that kind of trauma, these kinds of traumas from taking new incarnation in the next generations. So really, it's our job to kind of like tell truth, you know, and it's a hard thing because not everyone wants to know the truth.
And I would also add to that, I think it takes practice when you grow up in that kind of cultural community. So don't feel bad that you can't suddenly just write something that bears everything. Like, you have to start really, really small, because you have to first you have to kind of knock on that door. Then you have to unlock it. Then you got to turn the knob and like open it. So just small baby steps. In a way, you're building your courage, I think, because I now when I look back at it, you know, I think that's the arc that I ended up having. And then also you get older and, you know, you become your own person and grow into your own individuality and become comfortable with yourself. So hopefully
you become less and less like, you know, earth-shattering. You know, but thank you for this question. I want to ask you one final question, Priyanka, and I want to know what you're reading right now.
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you asked this. So during the pandemic, like a lot of people, like I felt like my brain just stopped working. Like I just couldn't get through like really, really dense material. Like it took a lot of effort and I wasn't absorbing anything. And I just like I've always, you know, read every single genre, but I just really rediscovered my joy of picture books. So I actually got both of these from Charis Books. These are both recommendations from their staff, Angela and Sarah. And I think actually, Rajiv, you're going to love both of these. So this was a recommendation from Sarah. It's called Monsoon by Uma Krishnaswamy. But it's this beautiful book just about the monsoon season in India with these like incredible illustrations. And I have never actually been in India during the monsoon, but it felt like it from reading this book. Like I felt like I got just as close of an experience to being there during that time. So this was a gem for me. And then the other one is this was their staff member, Sarah, puts together these book lists. So she had one for AAPI month. So this is In the Village by the Sea. And it's such a beautiful, cute, whimsical story. Again, these amazing illustrations about this fisherman who's by the sea. And there's a really fun surprise in the narrative. So that's what I'm reading. And I want to hear what you're reading always, Rajiv. And before this session ends, I also want to see if you can quickly give me your recipe for chai. And I want to know, do you measure these things out? Or do you just do it auntie style and just dump by scent and feel?
I've just recently read Your Nostalgia is Killing Me. It's a collection of linked stories by John Weir. And it's, I think, his third book. It's fantastic. And definitely worth reading. There's that, and then I also read Neil Patel's book called "Tell Me How to Be," and these are two books that have been really like interesting to think about. I really love what they both do with form and structure or in narrative writing, because the jury's out as to whether Your Nostalgia is Killing Me, whether that is nonfiction or fiction. Mm-hmm. But Neil Patel's book is definitely fiction. For chai, it's like I'm a half water, half milk kind of guy. I come in with half water. In it, I put elaichi, cardamom, and lots of ginger and black pepper, and that's it. And then I put in the tea. I use tea bags depending on the day, and sometimes I use chai masala, but like depending on the day too. Yeah. But then I would do it otherwise. I would like put in tea, let that boil for a couple minutes, and then I would add in the milk and then let that boil.
Yeah. But is it really half milk, half water for you? Is it really a 1-to-1?
Yeah, I do it because I count the cups of chai that I'm making, right? So it's like for 4 of us, I'll put 2 cups of water, 2 cups of milk.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little more milk.
So I will tell you, so mine is 2 cups of water to 3/4 of a cup of milk. So that's, my mom calls it karak chai. I think that's Gujarati, like, you know, like karak chai. Yeah. So we're heavier on the water, and then I'll do 2 teaspoons of the tea. And sometimes, like if we're traveling, I'll do the tea bags, but otherwise I'll do, like my mom just gets it loose, like bag bakri, I think, from the grocery store. Yeah. So we'll do that. I'll do 2 teaspoons of chai, 1/8 or like a pinch of chai masala, because the batch we currently have in the house is super, super spicy. Ginger, always ginger, and then elchi if we have it. Sometimes lemongrass or fudino if we have it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, like especially in the summer because we have so much mint growing in the backyard. So just throw a handful in there. But it's the same method as you. You let it boil, then you add the milk, and then you let it boil. That's like the second boil is key.
Totally. Yes. The milk becomes creamier. The milk
Yes.
tea becomes like thicker. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all now, do you say chai or do you say cha? Because in my family, we always say cha. But then like I feel like once they started serving it at Starbucks, everybody called it chai. And so I say that for fear that people aren't going to understand what I'm talking about.
I think the word in Bhojpuri is chai.
It is.
But,
Okay.
but we say tea only. So
yeah.
It's like, what kind of tea do you want? Do you want dip tea or do you want chai? And so it'll be kind of like, oh, dip tea. Let's just have tea. Yeah, because sometimes it's like, oh, chai takes so much, which is why Vag Bakri is like the best kind of tea to buy because it already has the masala in it.
Yeah.
And Padma Lakshmi also recommends it. When I saw that, I had sent it to my mom. I was like, we are clearly geniuses.
Clearly. Clearly, and she clearly needs to do like a chai book club with the two of us and with her, where she can make the chai, and then we'll talk about our books.
Totally. You can make tepla. I'll bring parante.
Yes.
Party.
Yes, I'll bring the bakri. I'll bring the kanvi, the kaman, all of it, all the Guju snacks. Well, it looks like we're at our time, so we should bring ER back up before we just like subsume this event with snacks.
I don't remember if I said this at the beginning or just in the green room, but this is the event that I was most disappointed was not in person because I was envisioning snacks and delicious tea and all the things. And so I would love to have y'all come to the physical space of the store in the future. And we have so many wonderful cooks in our community in Atlanta. So I know people would love to make you their versions of chai and snacks and everything. So something to look forward to. But until next time, I want to encourage folks to click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy both authors' books from Charis. It really does help us when you buy your books directly from us when it comes to events. You can also request that your local public library carry these books. You can recommend them to your library. It is so helpful to authors to know that libraries want the books as well. So please recommend. Do y'all want to shout out where folks can find you online or other places that put your handles and stuff or anything?
Sure, yeah. So I'm my only social is Instagram, and I'm Priyanka.Champaneri, and I also have a website, just PriyankaChampaneri.com.
Awesome.
And you can find me at Rajiv Mohabir on Twitter, Facebook, and Insta. You can find me on my website, which is rajivmohabir.com.
Easy. All right. Well, I'm going to be adding captions to this and putting it up on our YouTube channel, which is just /@CharisCircle. So check that out in the next few days, folks who are watching. And if there are people who would love this conversation who just couldn't be with us tonight, please do share it. It really does help us. The more folks can find out about these videos. And our entire archive of events that we've done during the pandemic is up there. So there's 3 years worth of wonderful author conversations. So dig into that and enjoy. But until next time, thank you both so much for being with us. This was really a delight. I learned so much and just enjoyed it. So I feel like I'm on my way to improving my auntie-ness as well.
Thank you so much, ER, and everyone at Charis and Rajiv. Oh my gosh, I wish we were in person too so I could give you a giant hug. But next time, my friend.
Really, truly, thank you all so much, and for your care and concern handling this. And also, Priyanka, thank you so much for your deep engagement. Always. It's always so wonderful to chat with you.
It always warms my soul.
Good night, y'all. Thank you.